Hello, hello. So yeah, just got off the phone with you. You're off to go and see little boy, little man, and hopefully at this moment you are pretty much there, and you're giving him a big squeeze, and the weight of the world is slowly kind of coming off your shoulders a little bit. That's the hope. I believe you had a special request for me to carry on some reading, so I've hopped straight to it, and we're going to pick up in chapter 2 right about now. So here goes. Okay. Right, chapter 2. Right position here. Right. So, Alana nodded to the high life music from the car radio. Her hand was on Odin Igbo's thigh. She raised it whenever he wanted to change gears, placed it back, and laughed when he teased her about being a distracting Aphrodite. It was exhilarating to sit beside him, with the car windows down and the air filled with dust and Rex Lawson's dreamy rhythms. He had a lecture in 2 hours, but instead of taking her to Enugu Airport, and although she had pretended to protest, she wanted him to. When they drove across the narrow roads that ran through Milliken Hill, with a deep gully on one side and a steep hill on the other side, she didn't tell him that she was driving a little fast. That he was driving a little fast. She didn't look either at the handwritten sign by the side of the road that said in rough letters, "Better be late than the late." She was disappointed to see the sleek white forms of aeroplanes gliding up as they approached the airport. He parked beneath the colonnaded entrance. Porters surrounded the car and called out, "Sir, madam, you get luggage." But Alana hardly heard them because he had pulled her to him. "I can't wait, Nookum," he said, his lips pressed to hers. He tasted of marmalade. She wanted to tell him that she couldn't wait to move to Nasuka either, but he knew anyway, and his tongue was in her mouth, and she felt a new warmth between her legs. Oh, dearie me. A car horn blew. It's not the only horn going on right now. A porter called out. This place is for loading. Oh, loading only. Finally, Odinigbo let her go and jumped out of the car and to get her bag from the boot. He carried it to the ticket counter. "Safe journey, Iuma," he said. "Drive carefully," she said. She walked him away, a thickly built man in khaki trousers and a short-sleeved shirt that looked crisped from ironing. She watched him walk away, a thickly built man in khaki trousers and a short-sleeved shirt that looked crisp from ironing. He threw his legs out with an aggressive confidence, the gait of a person who would not ask for directions but remained sure that he would somehow get there. After he drove off, she lowered her head and sniffed herself. She had dabbed on his Old Spice that morning impulsively and didn't tell him because he would laugh. He would not understand the superstition of taking a whiff of him with her. It was as if the scent could, at least for a while, stifle her questions and make her a little more like him, a little more certain, a little less questioning. She turned to the ticket seller and wrote her name on a slip of paper. "Good afternoon. One way to Lagos, please." "Ozobia?" The ticket seller's pock-marked face brightened in a wide smile. "Chief Ozogbia's daughter?" "Yes." "Oh, well done, madam. I will ask the porter to take you to the VIP lounge." The ticket seller turned round. "Ikina! Where's the foolish boy? Ikina!" Alana shook her head and smiled. "No need for that," she smiled again, reassuringly, to make it clear that it was not his fault that she did not want to be in the VIP lounge. The general lounge was crowded. Alana sat opposite three little children in threadbare clothes and slippers, who giggled intermittently while their father gave them severe looks. An old woman with a sour, wrinkled face, their grandmother, sat closest to Alana, clutching a handbag and murmuring to herself. Alana could smell ancient trunk for this occasion. Alana could smell the mustiness of her wrapper. It must have been dug out from an ancient trunk for this occasion. When a clever voice announced the arrival of a Nigeria Airway flight, the father sprang up and then sat down again. You must be waiting for somebody, Alana said to him in Igbo. Yes, Noanen, my brother is coming back from overseas after 4 years reading there. His Awari dialect had a strong rural accent. Alana said. She wanted to ask him where exactly his brother was coming back from and what he had studied, but she didn't. He might not know. The grandmother turned to Alana. He is the first in our village to go overseas, and our people have prepared a dance for him. The dance troupe will meet us in Ikeduru. She smiled proudly to show her brown teeth. Her accent was even thicker. It was difficult to make out everything she said. My fellow women are jealous, but it is my fault that their sons have empty brains, and my own son won the white people's scholarship. Another flight arrival was announced, and the father said, Cheer! It's him! The children stood up, and the father asked them to sit down, and then stood up himself. The grandmother clutched her handbag to her belly. Alana watched the plane descend. It touched down, and just as it began to taxi on the tarmac, the grandmother screamed and dropped her handbag. Alana was startled. What is it? Mama, the father said. Why does it not stop? The grandmother asked, both hands placed on her head in despair. Chima, my God, I am in trouble. Where is it taking my son? Have you people deceived me? Mama, it will stop, Alana said. This is what it does when it lands. She picked up the handbag and then took the older, calloused hands in hers. It will stop, she said again. She didn't let go until the plane stopped, and the grandmother slipped her hand away and muttered something about foolish people who could not build planes well. Alana watched the family hurry to the arrivals gate. As she walked towards her own gate minutes later, she looked back often, hoping to catch a glimpse of the sun from overseas, but she didn't. Her flight was bumpy. The man seated next to her was eating bitter cola, crunching loudly, and when he turned to make conversation, she slowly shifted away until she was pressed against the airplane wall. I just have to tell you, you are so beautiful, he said. She smiled and said thank you and kept her eyes on her newspaper. Odenigbo would be amused when she told him about this man, the way he always laughed at her admirers with his unquestioning confidence. It was what had first attracted her to him that June day 2 years ago in Ibadan, the kind of rainy day that wore the indigo colour of dusk, although it was only noon. She was home on holiday from England. She was in a serious relationship with Mohammed. She did not notice Odenigbo at first, standing ahead of her in a queue to buy a ticket outside the university theatre. She might never have noticed him if a white man with silver hair had not stood behind her, and if the ticket seller had not signalled to the white man to come forwards. Let me help you here, sir, the ticket seller said, in that comically contrived white accent that uneducated people like to put on. Alana was annoyed, but only mildly, because she knew the queue moved fast anyways, so she was surprised at the outburst that followed from a man wearing a brown safari suit and clutching a book, Odenigbo. He walked up to the front, escorted the white man back into the queue, and then shouted at the ticket teller, You miserable ignoramus! You see a white person and he looks better than your own people. You must apologise to everybody in this queue, right now. Alana had stared at him, at the arch of his eyebrows behind the glasses, the thickness of his body, already thinking of the least hurtful way to untangle herself from Mohammed. Perhaps she would have known that Odenigbo was different, even if he had not spoken. His haircut alone said it, standing up in a high halo. But there was an unmistakable grooming about him too. He was not one of those who used untidiness to substantiate their radicalism. She smiled and said, "Well done," as he walked past her, and it was the boldest thing she had ever done, the first time she had demanded the attention from a man. He stopped and introduced himself. "My name is Odenigbo. I'm Alana," she said, and later she would tell him that there had been a crackling magic in the air, and he would tell her that his desire at that moment was so intense that his groin ached. When she finally felt the desire, she was surprised about everything else. She did not know that a man's thrust could suspend memory, that it was possible to be poised in a place where she could not think or remember, but only feel. The intensity had not abated after 2 years, nor had her awe at his self-assured eccentricities and his fierce moralities. But she feared that this was because theirs was a relationship consumed in sips. She saw him when she came home on holiday. They wrote to one another. They talked on the phone. Now that she was back in Nigeria, they would live together, and she did not understand how he could not show some uncertainty. He was too sure. He looked out at the crowd outside her window, smoky thickets drifting by, and thought how fragile they were. Alana had not wanted to have dinner with her parents, especially since they had invited Chief Okonji, but her mother came into her room to ask her to please join them. It was not every day that they hosted the finance minister, and this dinner was even more important because of the building contract her father wanted. Biko, wear something nice. Cayenne will be dressing up too, her mother had added, as if mentioning her twin sister somehow legitimized everything. Now Alana smoothed the napkin on her lap and smiled at the steward placing a plate of halved avocado next to her. His white uniform was starched so stiff his trousers looked as if they had been made out of cardboard. "Thank you, Maxwell," she said. "Yes, Auntie," Maxwell mumbled and moved on with his tray. Alana looked around the table. Her parents were focused on Chief Okonji, nodding eagerly as he told a story about a recent meeting with Prime Minister Balawa. Kanine was inspecting her plate with that arch expression of hers, as if she was mocking the avocado. None of them thanked Maxwell. Alana wished they would. It was such a simple thing to do, to acknowledge the humanity of the people who served them. She had suggested it once. Her father said he paid them good salaries, and her mother said thanking them would give them room to be insulting, while Cayenne, as usual, said nothing, a bored expression on her face. "This is the best avocado I've tasted in a long time," Chief Okonji said. "It is from one of our farmers," her mother said, "the one near Asaba." "I'll have the steward put some in a bag for you," her father said. "Excellent," Chief Okonji said. "Alana, I hope you are enjoying yours, eh? You've been staring at it as if it's something that bites." He laughed, an overly hearty guffaw, and her parents promptly laughed as well. "It's very good." Alana looked up. There was something wet about Chief Okonji's smile. Last week, when he thrust his card into her hand at the Okoye Club, she had worried about the smile because it looked as if the movement of his lips made saliva fill his mouth and threaten to trickle down his chin. "I hope you've thought about coming to join us at the ministry, Alana. We need first-class brains like yours," Chief Okonji said. "How many people get offered jobs personally from the finance minister?" her mother said, to nobody in particular, and her smile lit up the oval, dark-skinned face that was so nearly perfect, so symmetrical, that friends called her art. Alana placed her spoon down. "I've decided to go to Nsukka. I'll be leaving in 2 weeks." She saw the way her father tightened his lips. Her mother left her hand suspended in the air for a moment, as if the news were too tragic to continue sprinkling salt. "I thought you had not made up your mind," her mother said. "I can't waste too much time or they will offer it to somebody else," Alana said. "Nsukka, is that right? You've decided to move to Nsukka?" Chief Okonji asked. "Yes, I applied for a job as instructor in the Department of Sociology, and I just got it," Alana said. She usually liked her avocado without salt, but it was bland now, almost nauseating. "Oh, so you're leaving us in Lagos?" Chief Okonji said. His face seemed to melt, folding in on itself. Then he turned and asked too brightly, "And what about you, Kainen?" Kainen looked Chief Okonji right in the eyes, with that stare that was so expressionless, so blank, that it was almost hostile. "What about me indeed?" She raised her eyebrows. "I too will be putting my newly acquired degree to good use. I'm moving to Port Harcourt to manage Daddy's business there." Alana wished she still had those flashes, moments when she could tell what Kainin was thinking. When they were in primary school, they sometimes looked at each other and laughed without speaking because they were thinking the same joke. She doubted that Kainen ever had those flashes now, since they never talked about such things anymore. They never talked about anything anymore. "So Kainen will manage the cement factory?" Chief Okonji asked, turning to her father. "She'll oversee everything in the east, the factories, and our new oil interests. She always had an excellent eye for business." Whoever said you lost out by having twin daughters is a liar," Chief Okonji said. "Kainen is not just like a son, she is like two," her father said. He glanced at Kainen, and Kainen looked away, as if the pride on his face did not matter, and Alana quickly focused on her plate so that neither would know she had been watching them. The plate was elegant, light green, the same colour as the avocado. Why don't you all come to my house this weekend, eh?" Chief Okonji said. "If only to sample my cook's fish pepper soup. The chap is from Nembe. He knows what to do with fresh fish." Her parents cackled loudly. Alana was not sure how that was funny, but then it was the minister's joke. "That sounds wonderful," Alana's father said. "It will be nice for us all to go before Alana leaves for Nuska," her mother said. Alana felt a slight irritation, a prickly feeling on her skin. "I would love to come, but I won't be here this weekend." "You won't be here?" her father asked. She wondered if the expression in his eyes was a desperate plea. She wondered too how her parents had promised Chief Okonji an affair with her in exchange for the contract. Had they stated it verbally, plainly, or had it been implied? "I have made plans to go to Kano to see Uncle Mabezi and the family, and Mohammed as well," she said. Her father stabbed at his avocado. "I see." Alana sipped her water and said nothing. After dinner, they moved to the balcony for liqueurs. Alana liked this after-dinner ritual and often would move away from her parents and the guests to stand by the railing, looking at the tall lamps that lit up the paths below, so bright that the swimming pool looked silver and the hibiscus and bougainvillea took on an incandescent patina over their reds and pinks. The first and only time Odenigbo visited her in Lagos, they had stood looking down at the swimming pool, and Odenigbo threw a bottle cork down and watched it plunk into the water. He drank a lot of brandy, and her father said that the idea of Nuska University was silly, that Nigeria was not ready for an indigenous university, and that receiving support from an American university rather than a proper university in Britain was plain daft. He raised his voice in response. Alana had thought he would realise that her father only wanted to gall him and show him how unimpressed he was by a senior lecturer from Nuska. She thought he would let her father's words go, but his voice rose higher and higher as he argued about Nuska being free of colonial influence, and she had blinked often to signal him to stop, although he may not have noticed since the veranda was dim. Finally the phone rang and the conversation had to end. The look in her parents' eyes was grudging respect, Alana could tell, but it did not stop them from telling her that Odenigbo was crazy and wrong for her, one of those hot-headed university people who talked and talked until everybody had a headache and nobody understood what had been said. "Such a cool night," Chief Okonji said behind her. Alana turned around. She did not know where her parents and Kainen had gone. She did not know when her parents and Kainen had gone inside. "Yes," she said. Chief Okonji stood in front of her, his agbada was embroidered with gold thread around the collar. She looked at his neck, settled into rolls of fat, and imagined him prying the folds apart as he bathed. "What about tomorrow? There's a cocktail party at Ikoyi Hotel," he said. "I want all of you to meet some expatriates. They are looking for land, and I can arrange for them to buy from your father at 5 or 6 times the price. I will be doing a St. Vincent de Paul charity drive tomorrow." Chief Okonjo moved closer. "I can't keep you out of my mind," he said, and a mist of alcohol settled on her face. "I'm not interested, Chief." "I just can't keep you out of my mind," Chief Okonjo said again. "Look, you don't have to work at the ministry. I can appoint you to the board, any board you want, and I will furnish a flat for you wherever you want." He pulled her to him, and for a while Alana did nothing, her body limp against his. She was used to this, being grabbed by men who walked around in a cloud of cologne-drenched entitlement, with the presumption that, because they were powerful and found her beautiful, they belonged together. She pushed him back, finally, and felt vaguely sickened at how her hands sank into his soft chest. "Stop it, Chief." His eyes were closed. "I love you, believe me, I really love you." She slipped out of his embrace and went indoors. Her parents' voices were faint from the living room. She stopped to sniff the wilting flowers in a vase on the side table near the staircase, even though she knew that their scent would be gone. Before walking upstairs... She stopped to sniff the wilting flowers in a vase on the side table near the staircase, even though she knew their scent would be gone before walking upstairs. Her room felt alien. The warm wood tones, the tan furniture, the wall-to-wall burgundy carpeting that cushioned her feet, the reams of space. That made Kainan call their rooms flats. The copy of Lagos Life was still on her bed. She picked it up and looked at the photo of her and her mother on page 5. Their faces contented and complacent at a cocktail hosted by the British High Commissioner. Her mother had pulled her close as a photographer approached. Later, after the flashbulb went off, Alana had called the photographer over and asked him please not to publish the photo. He looked at her oddly. Now she realised how silly it had been to ask him. Of course he would never understand the discomfort that came with being a part of a gloss that was her parents' life. She was in bed reading when her mother knocked and came in. "Oh, you're reading," her mother said. She was holding rolls of fabric in her hand. "Chief just left. He said I should greet you." Alana wanted to ask if they had promised him an affair with her, and yet she knew she never would. "What are those materials?" "Chief just sent his driver to the car for them before he left. It's the latest lace from Europe. See? Very nice. I fuqua." Alana felt the fabric between her fingers. "Yes, very nice." "Did you see the one he wore today? Original Ezigbo." Her mother sat down beside her. "And do you know, they say he never wears any outfit twice. He gives them to his houseboys once he has worn them." Alana visualised his poor houseboys, wood boxes incongruously full of lace. Houseboys, she was sure, did not get paid much every month, owning cast-off kaftans and agbadas they could never wear. She was tired. Having conversations with her mother tired her. "Which one do you want, I will make a long skirt and blouse for you and Kainan." "No, don't worry, Mum. Make something for yourself. I won't wear rich lace in Nuska too often." Her mother ran a finger over the bedside cabinet. "This silly house girl does not clean furniture properly. Does she think I pay her to play around?" Alana placed her book down. Her mother wanted to say something, she could tell, and the set smile, the punctilious gestures were a beginning. "So how is Odenigbo?" her mother finally asked. "He's fine." Her mother sighed in the overdone way that meant she wished Alana would see reason. "Have you thought about this Nuska move? Well, very well. I have never been sure of anything. But you will be comfortable there," her mother said, comfortable with a faint shudder. And Alana almost smiled because her mother had Odenigbo's basic university house in mind, with its sturdy rooms and plain furniture and uncarpeted floors. "I'll be fine," she said. "You can find work here in Lagos and travel down to see him during weekends." "I don't want to work in Lagos. I want to work in the university, and I want to live with him." Her mother looked at her for a little while longer before she stood up and said, "Good night, my daughter," in a voice that was small and wounded. Alana stared at the door. She was used to her mother's disapproval. It had coloured most of her major decisions, after all. When she chose 2 weeks suspension rather than apologise to her Heath Grove form mistress for insisting that the lessons on Pax Britannia were contradictory, when she joined the students' movement for independence at Ibadan, when she refused to marry Igwe Okabui's son, and later Chief Okoru's son. Still, each time the disapproval made her want to apologise, to make it up for her in some way. She was almost asleep when Kainen knocked. "So will you be spreading your legs for that elephant in exchange for Daddy's contract?" Kainen asked. Alana sat up, surprised. She did not remember the last time that Kainen had come into her room. "Daddy literally pulled me away from the veranda so we could leave you alone with the good cabinet minister," Kainen said. "Will he give Daddy the contract then?" "He didn't say. But it's not as if he will get nothing. Daddy will still give him 10% after all. The 10% is standard, so extras always help. The other bidders probably don't have a beautiful daughter." Kainen dragged the word out until it sounded cloying. "Sticky. Beautiful." She was flipping through the copy of Lagos Life, her silk robe tied tightly around her skinny waist. "The benefit of being the ugly daughter is that nobody uses you as sex bait." "They're not using me as sex bait." Kainen did not respond for a while. "They're not using me as sex bait." Kainen did not respond for a while. She seemed focused on an article in the paper. Then she looked up. "Richard is going to Nsukka too. He's received the grant, and he's going to write his book there." "Oh, good. So that means you'll be spending time in Nsukka?" Kainen ignored the question. "Richard doesn't know anybody in Nsukka, so maybe you could introduce him to your revolutionary lover." Alana smiled. Revolutionary lover. The things Kainen could say with a straight face. "I'll introduce them," she said. She had never liked any of Kainen's boyfriends, and never liked that Kainen dated so many white men in England. Their thinly veiled condescension, their false validations irritated her. Yet she had not reacted in the same way to Richard Churchill when Kainen brought him to dinner. Perhaps it was because he did not have that familiar superiority of English people who thought they understood Africans better than Africans understood themselves, and instead had an endearing uncertainty about him, almost a shyness. Or perhaps her parents had ignored him, unimpressed, because he didn't know anyone who was worth knowing. "I think Richard will like Odenigbo's house," Alana said. "It's like a political club in the evenings. He only invited Africans at first because the university is so full of foreigners, and he wanted Africans to have a chance to socialise with one another. At first it was BYOB, but now he asked them all to contribute some money, and every week he buys drinks and they meet in the house." Alana stopped. Kainen was looking at her woodenly, as if she had broken their unspoken rule and tried to start idle chatter. Kainen turned towards the door. "When do you leave for Kano?" "Tomorrow." Alana wanted Kainen to stay, to sit on the bed and hold a pillow to her lap and gossip and laugh into the night. "Go well, Giofuma, great auntie and uncle, and Aritse." "I will," Alana said. Although Kainen had already left and shut the door, she listened to Kainen's footsteps on the carpeted hallway. It was now that they were back in England, living in the same house again, that Alana realised just how distant they'd become. Kainen had always been the withdrawn child, the sullen and often acerbic teenager, the one who, because she did not try to please their parents, left Alana with that duty. But they had been close, despite that. They used to be friends. She wondered when it all changed, before they went to England for sure, since they didn't even have the same friends in London. Perhaps it was during their secondary school years at Heathgrove. Perhaps even before. Nothing had happened. No momentous quarrel, no significant incident. Rather, they had simply drifted apart. But it was Kynan who now anchored herself firmly in a distant place so that they could not drift back together again. Alana chose not to fly up to Kano. She liked to sit by the train window and watch the thick woods sliding past, the grassy plains unfurling, the cattle swinging their tails as they were herded by bare-chested nomads. When she got to Kano, it struck her once again how different it was from Lagos, from Nuska, from her hometown Umunnachi, how different the north as a whole was from the south. Here, the sand was fine, grey, and sun-seared, nothing like the clumpy red earth back home. The trees were tame, unlike the bursting greenness that sprang up and cast shadows on the road to Umunnachi. Here, miles of flatland went on, tempting the eyes to stretch just a little further until they seemed to meet with the silver and white sky. She took a taxi from the train station and asked the driver to stop first at the market so that she could greet Uncle Mbaise. On the narrow market path she manoeuvred between small boys carrying large loads on their heads, women haggling, traders shouting. A record shop was playing loud high life music, and she slowed a little to hum along to Bobby Benson's Taxi Driver before hurrying onto her uncle's stall. His shelves were lined with pails and other housewares. "Omalicha," he said when he saw her. It was what he called her mother too. Beautiful. "You have been on my mind. I knew you would come to see us soon. Uncle, good afternoon." They hugged. Alana rested her head on his shoulder. He smelt of sweat, as the open-air market, of wares arranged on dusty wooden shelves. It was hard to imagine Uncle Mbaise and her mother growing up together, brother and sister, not only because her uncle's light-complexioned face had none of her mother's beauty, but also because there was an earthiness about him. Sometimes Alana wondered if she would admire him as she did if he were not so different from her mother. Whenever she visited, Uncle Mbaise would sit with her in the yard after supper and tell her the latest family news. A cousin's unmarried daughter was pregnant, and he wanted her to come and stay with them to avoid the malice of the village. A nephew had died here in Kano, and he was looking into the cheapest way to take the body back home. Or he would tell her about politics, what the Igbo Union was organising, protesting, discussing. They held meetings in his yard. She had sat in it a few times and still remembered the meetings where irritated men and women talked about the northern school not admitting Igbo children. Uncle Mbaise had stood up and stamped his foot. "Ndi Bianyanyi, my people. We will build our own school. We will raise money and build our own school." After he spoke, Alana had joined in clapping her approval, in chanting. "Well spoken, that is how it shall be." But she had worried that it would be difficult to build a school. Perhaps it was more practical to try and persuade the Northerners to admit Igbo children. Yet, now, only a few years later, her taxi was on Airport Road, driving past the Igbo Union Grammar School. It was break time and the schoolyard was full of children. Boys were playing football in different teams on the same field, so that multiple balls flew in the air. Alana wondered how they could tell which ball was which. Clusters of girls were closer to the road, playing oga and swell, clapping rhythmically as they hopped first on one leg and then the other. Before the taxi parked outside the communal compound in Sabongari, Alana saw Auntie Ifika sitting by her kiosk on the roadside. Auntie Ifika wiped her hands on her faded wrapper and hugged Alana, pulled back to look at her, and hugged her again. "Oh, Alana! My Auntie Kedu." "Kedu? I am even better now that I see you. Aritse is not back from her sewing class. She will be back any time now. How is she doing? Ona Agawakawa, is her sewing going well? The house is full of patterns that she has cut. What of Odinchezo and Ekene? They are here. They are there. They visited last week and asked after you. How is Maiduguri treating them? Is their trade picking up? They have not said they are dying of hunger, Auntie Ithaca said, with a slight shrug. Alana examined the plain face and wished for a brief guilty moment that Auntie Ithaca were her mother. Auntie Ithaca was as good as her mother. Anyways, since it was Auntie Ithaca's breast that she and Kanan had sucked when their mother dried up soon after they were born. Kanan used to say their mother's breast did not dry up at all, and that their mother had given them to a nursing aunt only to save her own breasts from drooping. Come, Ada Anyi, Auntie Ithaca said. Let's go inside. She pulled down the wooden shutters of the kiosk, covering the neatly arranged cases of matches, chewing gum, sweet cigarettes, and detergent, and then picked up Alana's bag and led the way into the yard. The narrow bungalow was unpainted. The clothes hung out to dry were still stiff, as if desiccated by the hot afternoon sun. Old car tyres, the ones the children played with, were piled under the kuka tree. Alana knew the tranquil flatness of the yard would change soon, when the children came back from the school. The families would leave doors open and the veranda and the kitchen would fill with chatter. Uncle Mabaizi's family lived in 2 rooms. In the first, where worn sofas were pushed aside at night to make room for mats, Alana unpacked the things she had bought, bread, shoes, bottles of cream, while Auntie Ithaca stood back watching, her hands behind her back. May another person do for you? May another person do for you? Auntie Ithaca said. Aritz came home moments later and Alana braced herself to stand firmly, so Aritz's excited hub would not knock her down. Sister! You should have warned us that you were coming. At least we would have swept the yard better. Ah, sister, Aru Amakgi, you look well. There are stories to tell, oh. Aritz was laughing. Her plump body, her rounded arms, shook as she laughed. Alana held her close. She felt a sense that things were in order, the way they were meant to be, and that even if they tumbled down once in a while, in the end they would come back together again. This was why she came to Kano, this lucid place. When Auntie Ithaca's eyes began to dart around the yard, she knew it was in search of a suitable chicken. Auntie Ithaca was always killed one when she visited, even if it was the last she owned, sauntering around the yard, its feathers marked with a splash or two of red paint to distinguish it from the neighbours' chickens, which had bits of cloth tied to their wings or paint of a different colour. Alana no longer protested about the chicken, just as she no longer protested when Uncle Mabetse and Auntie Ithaca slept on mats next to the many relatives who had always seemed to be staying with them, so that she could have their bed. Auntie Ithaca walked casually towards a brown hen, grasped it quickly, and handed it to Aritze to kill in the backyard. They sat outside the kitchen while Aritze plucked it, and Auntie Ithaca blew the chaff from the rice. A neighbour was boiling corn, and once in a while, when the water frothed over, the stove fire hissed. Children were playing in the yard now, raising white dust, shouting. A fight broke out under the kuka tree, and Alana heard a child scream at another in Igbo, "Your mother's pussy!" The sun had turned red in the sky before it began its descent, when Uncle Mabaize came home. Where are we? He called out to Alana to come and greet his friend Abdul Malik. Alana had met the Horser man once before. He sold leather slippers close to Uncle Mabaize's stall in the market, but she had bought a few pairs that she took back to England but never wore because it was the middle of winter. Oh, Alana was just finished her master's degree at London University. It is not easy, Uncle Mabaize said proudly. Well done, Abdul Malik said. He opened his bag and brought out a pair of slippers and held them out to her. His narrow face creased in a smile. his teeth stained with cola nut and tobacco and whatever else Alana did not know, stains of varying shades of yellow and brown. He looked as if it were he who was receiving a gift. He had that expression of people who marvelled at education with the calm certainty that it would never be theirs. She shook the slippers with both hands. "Thank you, Abdul Malik, thank you." Abdul Malik pointed at the ripe gourd-like pods on the kuka tree and said, "You come my house. My wife cook very sweet kuka soup." "Oh, I will come next time," Alana said. He muttered more congratulations before he sat with Uncle Mabaise on the veranda with a bucket of sugar cane in front of them. They gnawed off the hard green peels and chewed the juicy white pulp, speaking Hausa and laughing. They spit the chewed cane out on the dust. Alana sat with them for a while, but their Hausa was too swift, too difficult to follow. She wished she were fluent in Hausa. And Yoruba, like her uncle and auntie cousin were, something she would gladly exchange her French or Latin for. In the kitchen, Aritze was cutting open the chicken and Auntie Ifika was washing the rice. She showed them slippers from Abdul Malik and put them on. The pleated red straps made her look slender, felt more feminine. "Very nice," Auntie Ifika said. "I shall thank him." Alana sat on a stool and carefully avoided looking at the cockroach eggs, smooth black capsules logged in all corners of the table. A neighbour was building a wood fire in one corner, and despite the slanting openings in the roof, the smoke choked the kitchen. "Ai Makwa, all her family eats every day, is a stockfish," Aritze said, gesturing towards the neighbour with pursed lips. "I don't know if her poor children even know what meat tastes like." Aritze threw her head back and laughed. Alana glanced at the woman. She was an Ijaw and could not understand Aritze's Igbo. "Maybe they like stockfish," she said. "Oh, Diagu, like it indeed. Do you know how cheap the thing is?" Aritze was still laughing as she turned to the woman. "Ibiba, I am telling my big sister that your soup always smells so delicious." The woman stopped blowing at the firewood and smiled, a knowing smile, and Alana wondered if perhaps the woman understood Igbo but chose to humour Aritze's fun poking. There was something about Aritze's effervescent mischief that made people forgiving. "So you are moving to Nuska to marry Odenigbo, sister?" Aritze asked. "I don't know much about marriage yet. I just want to be closer to him. I don't know about marriage yet. I just want to be closer to him, and I want to teach." Aritze's round eyes were admiring and bewildered. "It is only women that know too much. It is only women that know too much book like you who can say that, sister. If people like me who didn't know book wait too long, we will expire." Aritze paused as she removed a translucent pale egg from inside the chicken. "I want a husband today and tomorrow. Oh, my mates have all left me and gone to husbands' houses." "You are young," Alana said. "You should focus on your sewing for now." "Is it sewing that will give me a child? Even if I have managed to pass to go to school, I would still want a child now." "There is no rush, Ari." Alana wished she could shift her stool closer to the door, to fresh air, but she didn't want Auntie Ifika or Aritze or even the neighbour to know that the smoke irritated her eyes and throat, or that the sight of the cockroach eggs nauseated her. She wanted to seem used to it all, to this life. "I know you will marry Odenigbo, sister, but honestly I am not sure I want you to marry a man from Abba. Men from Abba are so ugly, Kai. If only Mohammed was an Igbo man, I would eat my hair if you did not marry him." "I have never seen a more handsome man. Odenigbo is not ugly. Good looks come in different ways," Alana said. That is what the relatives of the ugly monkey Enwe told him to make him feel better, that good looks come in different ways. Men from Abba are not ugly, Aunt Ivka said. My people came from there, after all. And do your people not resemble the monkey? Aritze said. Your full name is Aritze Dikuwunem, isn't it? You come from your mother's people, so perhaps you look like a monkey as well, Aunt Ivka murmured. Olana laughed. So why are you talking marriage like this, Ari? Have you seen anybody you like, or should I find you one of Mohammed's brothers? No, Aritze waved her hands in the air in mock horror. Papa would kill me first of all if he knew I was even looking at a horse a man like that. Unless your father will kill a corpse, because I will start with you first, Auntie Ithaca said, and rose with the bowl of clean rice. There is someone, sister. Aritze moved closer to Olana, but I am not sure he is looking at me. Oh? Why are you whispering? Auntie Ivka asked. Am I talking to you? It is not my big sister. It is not my big sister I am talking to. Aritze asked her mother, but she raised her voice as she continued. His name is Nakawanze, and he is from close to us, from Ogidi. He works at the railway, but he has not told me anything. I don't know if he is looking at me hard enough. If he is not looking at you hard enough, there is something wrong with his eyes, Auntie Ivka said. Have you people seen this woman? Why can't I talk to my big sister in peace? Aritze rolled her eyes, but it was clear she was pleased and perhaps had used the opportunity to tell her mother about Nankawanse. That night, Olana lay on her bed, on her uncle and auntie's bed. She watched Aritze through the thin curtain that hung on a rope attached to the rails on the wall. The rope was not taut, and the curtain sagged in the middle. She followed the up-down movement of Aritze's breathing and imagined what growing up had been like for Aritze and her brother Odin Chezo and Ekini, seeing their parents through the curtain, hearing the sounds that might suggest an eerie pain to a child as their father's hips moved and their mother's arms clutched him. She had never heard her own parents making love, never even seen any indication that they had, but she had always been separated from them by hallways that got longer and more thickly carpeted as they moved from house to house. When they moved to their present home with its 10 rooms, her parents chose different bedrooms for the first time. I need the whole wardrobe, and it will be nice to have your father visit, her mother had said, but the girlish laughs had not rung true for Olana. The artificiality of her parents' relationship always seemed harder, more shaming when she was here in Kano. The window above her was open, the still night air thick with the odours from the gutters behind the house, where people emptied the toilet buckets. Soon she heard the mutter of the night soilmen as they collected the sewage. She fell asleep listening to the scraping sounds of their shovels as they worked, shielded by the dark. The beggars outside the gates of Mohammed's family home did not move when they saw Olana. They remained seated on the ground, leaning against the mud compound walls. Flies perched on them in dense clusters, so that for a moment it seemed as if their frayed white kaftans had been splashed with dark-coloured paint. Olana wanted to put some money in their bowls, but decided not to. If she were a man, they would have called out to her and extended their begging bowls, and the flies would rise in the buzzing clouds. One of the gatemen recognised her and opened the gates. "Welcome, madam." "Thank you, Sile. How are you?" "You remember my name, madam," he beamed. "Thank you, madam. I am well, madam." "And your family?" "Well, madam, by the will of Allah." "Is your master back from America?" "Yes, madam. Please come in. I will send to call master." Mohammed's red sports car was parked in front of the sprawling sandy yard, but what held Olana's attention was the house, the graceful simplicity of its flat roof. She had sat down on the veranda. The best surprise, she looked up and Mohammed was there, in a white kaftan, smiling down at her. His lips were a sensual curve, lips that had once kissed often during those days when she spent most of her weekends in Kano, eating rice with her fingers in his house, watching him play polo at the flying club. reading the bad poetry he wrote for her. "You're looking so well," she told him as they hugged. "I wasn't sure you'd be back from America." "I was planning to come to Lagos to see you." Mohammed moved back to look at her. There was a tilt to his head, a narrowing of his eyes that meant he still harboured hope. "I'm moving to Nuska," she said. "So you are finally coming to become an intellectual and marry your lecturer?" "Nobody said anything about marriage. And how is Janet? Or is it Jane? I mix up your American women." Mohammed raised one eyebrow. She could not help admiring his caramel complexion. She used to tease him about being prettier than she was. "What did you do to your hair?" he asked. "It doesn't suit you at all. Is this how your lecturer wants you to look, like a bushwoman?" Alana touched her hair, newly plaited with black thread. Plaited. "My auntie did it. I quite like it." "I don't. I prefer your wigs." Mohammed moved closer and hugged her again. When she felt his arm tighten around her, she pushed him away. "You won't let me kiss you?" "No," she said, although it had not been a question. "You're not telling me about Jane. So this means I won't see you any more when you go to Nuska?" "Of course I will see you. I know that lecture of yours is so crazy, so I won't come to Nuska." Mohammed laughed. His tall, slim body and tapering fingers spoke of fragility, gentleness. "Would you like a soft drink or some wine? You have alcohol in this house. Someone must inform your uncle," Alana teased. Mohammed rang a bell and asked a steward to bring some drinks. Afterwards, he sat thoroughly rubbing his thumb and forefinger together. "Sometimes I feel my life is going nowhere. I travel and drive imported cars and women follow me, but something isn't there. Something isn't right, you know?" She watched him. She knew where he was going with this. Yet when he said, I wish things didn't change, she was touched and flattered. "You'll find a good woman," she said limply. "Rubbish," he said, and as they sat side by side drinking Coke, she recalled the disbelieving pain on his face when she had only deepened when she told him that she had to end it right away because she did not want to be unfaithful to him. She expected that he would resist. She knew very well how much he loved her, but she had been shocked when he told her to go ahead and sleep with Odenigbo as long as she did not leave him. Mohammed, who often half-joked about coming from a lineage of holy warriors, the very avatars of pious masculinity. Perhaps it was why her affection for him would always be mingled with gratitude, a selfish gratitude. He could have made their breakup more difficult for her. He could have left her with much more guilt. She placed her glass down. "Let's go for a drive. I hate it when I visit Kano and only get to see the ugly cement and zinc of Sabangari. I want to see the ancient mud statue and go around the lovely city walls again. Sometimes you are just like the white people, the way they gawk at everyday things." "Do I?" "It's a joke. How are you going to learn not to take everything so seriously if you live with that crazy lecturer?" Mohammed stood up. Come, we should stop by first so you can greet my mother." As they walked past a small gate at the back of the courtyard that led into his mother's chambers, Alana remembered the trepidation she used to feel coming here. The reception area was the same. The gold dyed walls and thick Persian rugs and grooved patterns on the exposed ceilings. Mohammed's mother looked unchanged too. With the ring in her nose and the silk scarves around her head, she was fine spun in the way that used to make Alana wonder if she wasn't uncomfortable, dressing up every day and simply sitting at home. But the older woman did not have that standoffish expression. She did not speak stiffly, with her eyes focused somewhere between Alana's face and the hand-carved panelling. Instead, she got up and hugged Alana. "You look so lovely, my dear. Don't let the sun spoil that skin of yours." "Nagard, thank you, Hajia," Alana said, wondering how it was possible for people to switch affection off and on, to tie and untie emotions. I am no longer the Igbo woman you wanted to marry who would taint the lineage with infidel blood, Alana said as they climbed into Mohammed's red Porsche. So I am a friend now. I would have married you anyhow, and she knew it. Her preference did not matter. Maybe not at first, but what about later? What about when we had been married for 10 years? Your parents felt the same way as she did. Mohammed turned to look at her. Why are we talking about this now? There was something inexpressibly sad in his eyes, or maybe she was imagining it. Maybe she wanted him to seem sad at the thought that they would never marry. She did not wish to marry him, and yet she enjoyed dwelling on the same things that they did not do and would never do. Sorry, she said. There's nothing to apologize for. Mohammed reached out and took her hand. The car made rasping sounds as they drove past the gates. That's too much dust in the exhaust. These cars weren't made for our parts. You should buy a Hardy Peugeot. Yes, I should. Alana stared at the beggars clumped around the walls of the palace, their bodies and begging bowls covered in flies. The air smelt of the spicy sour leaves from the neem tree. I am not like the white people, she said quietly. Mohammed glanced at her. Of course you're not. You're a nationalist and a patriot, and soon you will marry your lecturer, the freedom fighter. Alana wondered if Mohammed's lightness hid a more serious mockery. Her hand was still in his, and she wondered too if he was having difficulty manoeuvring the car with one hand. Page 47. Hey, I don't want to lose this file because I've been reading for nearly an hour, so I'm going to stop here and get a drink as well. I've got a dry throat, as you can probably hear me going. Yeah, hope you're doing well, and hope this has kind of helped you to relax, and yeah, I'll get some more videos done soon. All right, love you lots. Bye.